All right. Welcome everybody in the room and online to Sustainable Business Environmental Studies 497. My name is Ben Packard, and I'm thrilled to be co-teaching this class with Gary Handworth. And welcome everybody here today. We have an interesting conversation ahead of us with Dayna Gross. Dayna is a former teammate of mine in my time at the Nature Conservancy and joins us after leaving the Nature Conservancy and now working for Syngenta North America, where she serves as manager of sustainability partnerships and programs. And when I met Dayna in about 2015, I believe, Dayna, you'll have to tell me if I'm wrong here, you were the manager of this property that I think you're showing us this picture of, which is the Silver Lake, the Nature Conservancy's property in Sun Valley, Idaho, which is the Silver Lake Reserve. And I know we have some folks in the room who have been there, who might have grown up right around there. So we've got some folks who are recognizing this picture. But Dayna was working closely with farmers in this area. She's going to share her story about working with the Nature Conservancy and then joining a large agricultural corporation like Syngenta. So with that, welcome, Dayna. Thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that nice introduction, Ben. Nice to see everybody, and thanks for having me. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to talk a lot about the Nature Conservancy. I'll talk about Syngenta. I'm bringing more of my perspective than TNC's perspective or Syngenta's to this conversation, so just keep that in mind. So this is Silver Creek that we're looking at in the picture. And I thought what I would do for this conversation, I know you guys have been talking a lot about what sustainability is, what makes a business sustainable, what sustainability mean now with climate change and the urgency that everybody's feeling, especially also with the size of businesses as they're becoming bigger and bigger. What does that mean? So I thought what I'd do is talk about the last 20 years or so of my career, which amazingly isn't the entire thing. I was doing the math this morning and I was like, oh my gosh, I've been working for a long time. But just talking about the last 20 years that I've been in sustainability, I'll talk for like 25 minutes. I've got a bunch of stories and examples, and then I can't wait to hear your questions and your feedback and your comments, whatever you guys want to say. So my journey started at Silver Creek, as Ben mentioned. I was working as a landscape architect in Sun Valley and decided, I want to do something that's maybe more meaningful, that makes change on the ground, that I can get my hands dirty and really, make things better. And so I took a job at the Nature Conservancy. I made $6 an hour, but I ended up staying there for 10 years. Managed the property. I got a raise, luckily, and they gave me a house to live in. And I lived on Silver Creek Preserve for 10 years, and it is a really special and unique place. It's a spring-fed creek in the middle of the high desert. So if any of you have been there, you know how amazing it is. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. One of the coolest things while I was there was the first year that I showed up, the Dalai Lama came to town, and before he came, he sent over some of his lamas to find the most auspicious place in the valley, and they chose Silver Creek. And we didn't end up having the event there just because the logistics of getting 30,000 people to a Nature Conservancy preserve were a little dramatic, but it was something that resonated with me as I spent time there. Ecologically, it's very special. It's very special socially, just a really neat place. And for those of you who don't know the Nature Conservancy, that's really what they do. They have been around since the 1950s, and they started essentially as a land trust, buying properties, setting them aside. Over time, they opened those properties up to people. They started selling them back to the community or transitioning to the community. More recently today, they do a lot of kind of legal manipulation of land and protected areas to make sure they're protected in perpetuity, that the community has access to them. They're doing a lot of really cool investment type work. But it was a great introduction into sustainability, especially at Silver Creek, because you can see kind of from the picture, it was surrounded by agricultural land. It is surrounded by agricultural land. And one of the biggest issues that we had was that in the fall, the farmers would prepare the fields. So usually the fields had no cover on them, no sort of crop or anything. They were getting them prepared for planting in the spring. And it would snow, and then in the spring, the snow would melt and the topsoil would run right into the creek. And so Silver Creek has pretty massive sedimentation issues. There's also issues with groundwater pumping and depleting the springs. But we were very focused on the sediment at the time, and some of the companies that we were working with, General Mills and Coors in particular, were very interested in helping their farmers be more sustainable. And so we did, this is not advancing. Oh, there, can you guys see a different slide?
Yes.
Yeah. So we did a series of projects with General Mills, with Coors. They were very interested in the area because it was highly public. People could see it. They're growers. There were a small amount of growers. They knew a lot of people in the area. They could talk about this work. So essentially they funded work that the Nature Conservancy did. We put in fences. You can see that top picture is a fence we put in with a field on the right. And then the left-hand side is a buffer area with springs at the bottom. And then I can't tell if that chat is for me. I see a chat. Ben, just let me know if somebody's asking a question or something. We did a series of like irrigation projects, planning. We did field tours. And this was really my first sort of foray into business sustainability and corporate sustainability. And I got to know the chief sustainability officer at General Mills. And Ben, I think that you probably ran into Steve Peterson quite a bit. I don't know if you've heard this story, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the story that he told me. So hopefully it's right. But Steve was telling me that the way that General Mills got started on their sustainability journey was he showed up to work one day before he was the chief sustainability officer. The parking lot was full. They had black helicopters, and Earth First was having a rally, and they were rallying about something that General Mills had done, something about their products. And he walked into the office and his boss said to Steve, he said, "Steve, you're the new chief sustainability officer, the first one we've ever had. Fix this problem." And that was how General Mills started down the sustainability path. Did you hear that same story, Ben? I'm curious.
Yes, I heard something similar, and it wouldn't be the company that started that way.
So anyway, I love that story because people don't often think about nonprofits, and in particular environmental nonprofits, sort of working differently and really complementing the work that we do. So I benefited from that Earth First rally several years later because General Mills was now funding my work on the ground with farmers. It might not have happened if it hadn't been for Earth First. It probably would have in this day and age, but it might not have happened then. It might not have happened that quickly. So these tools up here, that's the Earth First, kind of one of their logos. But Earth First, Mighty Earth, Greenpeace, these are the organizations that are really activist type organizations. They're the ones that are, chaining themselves to trees or jumping on whaling ships or rallying at General Mills. That's really how they focus their efforts, is calling out issues, making them very public, bringing a lot of attention to them. And then you have the Earth Justice type organizations who focus a lot on legal mechanisms for environmental movement. So, suing people or changing laws or kind of more of an advocacy kind of role. I'm going to talk about another project with an organization similar to Earth Justice in a minute. And then you have the Nature Conservancy, Conservation International, World Wildlife Fund. And I think of those organizations as, once the issues are brought to light and the tool, the companies know what they need to do, or hopefully they do. Geographies are focusing on water, or biodiversity or whatever it may be. These are the organizations that really rally around building programs, changing policy, doing that kind of building of people on the ground to focus on certain issues in certain places. And those three organizations are all global, work pretty much all over the world. The Conservation International is not as focused in the United States, but Nature Conservancy and WWF, you probably all know them. They're very well known. But I think it's important to think about them because oftentimes they're complementing each other, whether or not they're friendly. So I can't say that the Nature Conservancy or in particular is, working with Earth First, but sometimes the work that they do helps us down the road. So this is a project that I worked on in central Idaho. And I don't know if some of you are from Idaho, you probably know the area in the Pioneer Mountains. It's gorgeous. And up there, there are many large ranchers, very dependent on public grazing. So grazing on public lands, on Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service. And there's an organization called Western Watersheds, who, if you guys are from the West, you may have heard of. Their business model is essentially to sue the federal government. So they sue Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, pretty much at every chance they get, largely around public lands grazing. And so the issue in this region is that the BLM was so bogged down by litigation. They had so much staff time put into dealing with lawsuits that they didn't have time to monitor their allotments. They really had no idea what was happening on the public lands. They didn't even, they didn't know if the ranchers were doing a good job or a bad job. And the ranchers had very little ability to be flexible and make changes if something came up. So like if there was a drought on one allotment, they couldn't just take their cows and put them somewhere else. They had to keep them there, which causes huge environmental issues. And so the Nature Conservancy and about 10 ranchers, and these ranchers grazed on about 1.5 million acres. So this is not a small amount of land in central Idaho. And a couple of other nonprofits got together and said, what is the problem here? Like, it's not just Western Watersheds suing the BLM. There's certainly issues on the public lands with the grazing. So what can we do to fix it? So we worked with the Bureau of Land Management. We came up with a monitoring protocol that they accepted. And then we built a program around what we call conservation riders. And these are students that would come out for 3 to 6 months and work with the ranchers. And they were essentially cowboys and cowgirls. And they would go out and fix fences and move cows. And while they were out there in their downtime, they did all the monitoring, submitted it to the Bureau of Land Management. So it took the burden off BLM, and they were able to know more of what was going out on the allotment, so they could actually suggest changes to the ranchers, and the ranchers could adjust based on data and information, and having good information about what they could do better. So I like that example because I'm sure you don't think of partners, and sometimes you don't think of those people, those groups as being good partners, but they really do, and they can kind of move the ball in the same direction. Another thing that I like to think about beyond just the nonprofit sort of business model is, where is the business model, or what is the general business model of the company you're working with? So when I saw in your syllabus what makes a business sustainable, my immediate reaction was, it really depends. It depends on what kind of business it is. It depends on how big it is. It depends on where they're sourcing their products. It depends on who they're selling to. It also depends on where they are in this sustainability journey. So on the left-hand side, on the compliance, this is kind of where Earth First started their rally at General Mills, right? They saw an issue, clearly, I don't know what the issue was actually. General Mills was doing something wrong. That was their reaction was, let's build a sustainability team. We have a chief sustainability officer. We'll take care of this. Generally, companies then move into the first generation, or like taking care of their own spaces. So looking at water conservation in their buildings, changing lights, if they're building new buildings, thinking about what kind of energy they have in them, that sort of thing. The second generation is where I was working with Coors and General Mills in Idaho, was really around reaching out to their supply shed and reaching out to their growers and funding some work in the community with their growers. They weren't really changing their supply chain. They weren't in general making barley more sustainable, but they were doing some cool projects and they were touching their supply chain. And then the third generation, which is where I spend a lot of my time now, is when companies, and we're seeing this a lot in the climate space, set these huge science-based targets and goals, and then have to figure out how to meet them. And this is where I get super excited, because companies set big goals, and it's really the nuts and bolts of how you make change on the ground that is difficult. And so I spend a lot of my time trying to figure out, how can we actually trickle that down through the business, and who are the right partners we need at the table to make those goals a reality. So these are, science-based goals generally go far enough up in the supply chain that the companies don't even really have access to them. They don't have direct contracts with the growers, or they don't even know sometimes where their beef is coming from, for instance. And so being able to look at a business, understand sort of what they do know and what they don't know, and how to make those programs to fit within the business, is what I spend a lot of time on. And it's really exciting stuff. Go to this next one. So I'm going to talk about Syngenta in just a minute, but I wanted to bring this up here before I forgot, because I'll mention it again at the end. But what I have noticed over the years, and when I was working on Ben's team, I worked in the corporate engagement team and managed large companies like Walmart and McDonald's and a couple other big agriculture companies. But when sustainability really seems to work in a company, just in general, is when they have taken care of their own backyard. They have supported nonprofits through the years, like the General Mills Project. So they have a network of people that they know can help them on the ground. They have leadership level support. So their CEOs are talking about sustainability. They have an environment where they're going, it's okay to try something and not have it work. And this is unusual in a business, because it's all about a business and making, a profit. So that's a unique thing, I think. And then some of the challenging pieces are that what I've noticed at companies is that when you do have this really ambitious leadership team talking about sustainability, you build a sustainability team, usually young, excited people coming in wanting to do really cool stuff. There's the business in the middle. And I've heard somebody once call it corporate permafrost. And it's ironic that I don't think it's actually a good one now that we're talking about climate change, because I don't necessarily want that to thaw, but there's a permafrost in the middle, because you have salespeople and you have people on the ground, and those people have a job to do. And so when the sustainability teams go to them and say, I want you to help me with this project, or I want you to do this, it's usually a cold shoulder, my experience. So thawing that and figuring out how to break through that is a really big challenge. And then the other component that I think really makes sustainability successful in any business is when you can figure out where the levers are in order to incorporate sustainability into business decisions. And one of the examples of that is a project I worked on with the tuna group at the Conservancy. And the tuna supply chain, I don't know how much you guys study oceans. I would imagine a lot being in Seattle, but huge issues in the tuna supply chain. Traceability, transparency is just almost like non-existent. And it's really hard to make changes when you don't know where your fish is coming from. You don't know, if there's slavery on the ships. You don't know what the fish populations are doing. All of that stuff is very, very unknown. And so the Conservancy essentially built a tuna business, contracted with fishermen. Well, first of all, got permits or the right fishing rights from island communities, contracted with fishermen, processors through the whole supply chain, and built a tuna company end to end so they could see where it was coming from and what was going on. And they built it with fundraised dollars. So it was a philanthropic effort. And the profits are going back to the communities to do conservation projects. And actually, if you buy, I don't know if you knew this, Ben, but this project has come to fruition. And now if you buy Walmart tuna, most likely it's Pacific Island tuna that came from this business that the Conservancy built. And the business people the buyers at Walmart were the ones that made that decision. And that's where the real power comes in. They have the capacity to change how they buy the tuna. They could make those decisions just based on business decisions. So super exciting stuff there. So I'm going to talk about two projects at Syngenta that I'm working on, and then I'll wrap it up and we have plenty of time for questions. So Syngenta, for those of you who don't know, is a global agribusiness company. We're all over the world. We've got about 53,000 people working all over the world. We sell seeds, so mostly soy and corn seeds, vegetable seeds, sunflower seeds. If you've ever had a seedless watermelon, it's probably a Syngenta watermelon. We sell chemicals, so crop protection products, so pesticides. And I went from the Nature Conservancy to working at a pesticide company, which was challenging with my family, but they're wrapping their heads around it. So pesticides, seed treatment, herbicides. We have a biologicals business, so thinking about what biological pest control and things like that. Excuse me. Syngenta has an amazing leadership team. Our CEO is this just incredibly cool guy, very focused on sustainability, very excited about it. Ben and I actually worked on a collaboration between Syngenta and the Nature Conservancy when we first met. They're really innovative in this world, but they do suffer from this permafrost question. There are salespeople within Syngenta who really, they're busy all the time. So asking them to work on sustainability projects is really tough. The other component is thinking about the business model. Syngenta doesn't work directly with farmers. Our whole focus is helping farmers be more productive, growing more on what land they can, and saving the rest for the world and nature. But we don't have a direct relationship in most cases with those farmers. We go through retailers. So we sell our products to a retail office, and then the farmer goes to the retailer and buys from them. So it makes it really hard to do programs directly with farmers. And when I started, we really wanted to focus a program on beneficial insects. So not just pollinators, but beneficial insects that can get in the field and control pests, pollinators as well, birds, everything really. In order to do that, we needed a connection to the growers. And so what we did was we partnered with a retail business. We found somebody that had a similar priority. We're piloting a couple of projects this year, and then we'll turn that into a commercial offering. So a farmer could, if they're like a gold star farmer, they'll get a special pollinator beneficial package where they'll get seeds and they'll get technical expertise. They'll get somebody to come out and help them establish the pollinator beneficial insect. So it turns it into an offering that the sales staff can say, okay, got this great grower. He's, or she is really innovative and great customer. So it's a special thing that we can offer to them. So changing it, making it part of their sales business is something that has been hard for me to wrap my head around, but super important in business sustainability. The other thing I know you guys have been talking a lot about is climate change and technologies. And, there's so many interesting technologies in agriculture, and the footprint of agriculture obviously is a real issue for climate change. I'm going to tell you about this product called Inogen, it's pretty fascinating in its own. It's an alpha amylase enzyme. So apparently Syngenta has people all over the world like looking for cool things. And this enzyme was found in the ocean this is what I was told, in the ocean on top of a volcano. It was also found in the ocean on top of an iceberg. And so it has this ability to survive in these very dramatic temperature ranges. Alpha amylase is also added to feed. It helps you digest and change. I wrote this down because I can't ever remember. Starch to sugar. I was going to say sugar to starch. It helps you change starch to sugar, so it's often added to feed. But what Syngenta did was they took the enzyme and actually put it into a corn kernel. And the reason that this technology was created was for the ethanol business. Those ranges of temperature in an ethanol plant are dramatic, and they wanted a more efficient corn for the ethanol plant. Just by accident, we discovered that when you feed Inogen to cattle, beef cattle, dairy cattle, you get an incredible efficiency. So the amount of the changing from starch to sugar is amplified dramatically. So in the beef supply chain, there's something like a 5 to 10% efficiency gain, which for cattle and dairy is pretty dramatic. In the United States in particular, those systems are so efficient, it's hard to get that amount of opportunity. So we had a product that we were selling for one reason. We found it has environmental outcomes. And now we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we get this into the supply chain? Companies like Tyson, companies like McDonald's who have these climate goals, can we use Inogen to help them meet some of their climate goals? And we're starting to look at products. We're a big research and development arm that focuses mostly on helping farmers be more productive in the areas they're producing crops. But then how do we also use that technology to make improvements for the environment? So I think the key for understanding, is a business sustainable? Are there opportunities within that business for improvement? Who's the right partner? I think just understanding the basic business model. Are they there to sue you? Are they selling directly to the consumers? Do they have a direct contract with a farmer? There's just like basic business questions are super helpful. And I remember a couple of times in the corporate engagement team at the Nature Conservancy, walking into a room with a company and we would, pitch an idea and there would just be silence. And I think the silence often came because we didn't really understand their business model and whether the idea would even really work within their business. I can think of this happened with Tyson right before I left, where we were pitching an idea to them, and it was within their beef supply chain. And they said, we don't even have visibility. We don't even know where our feed is being grown. We can't do anything there. So just understanding that is super important. And then once you do that, you can understand, where's the alignment? Where are the common goals? Where are there opportunities? Because you are not going to be doing it alone. There's always improvement. There's always partners that you'll need. And so those are kind of the key points when I'm thinking about, okay, building a sustainability program, what's it going to take? And then the last one, I think, gets to the point I made earlier about the openness to fail, in that sustainability is so new and every business is different and every geography is different, that, ideas are made and then they have to be tried out. So there's created at least twice, right? But more often it's probably 4 or 5 or 6 times before you get it right. And I remind myself of that pretty much on a daily basis. So, so I think that's just a good point to keep in mind. And the good news is that we do often get it right. And so I think that there is progress being made and a lot of opportunity out there. So I think I'll stop and answer questions.
I did have a question. I didn't know if anyone else had their hand raised before me.
Oh,
No,
I'm
it doesn't-
sorry. I haven't been watching the people.
No, you're good. I just raised my hand because I was going to go back to the alpha amylase one that you were talking about before.
Yeah.
I was a little bit so I'm more into chemical engineering and all the other fun stuff like bioresource science, all the other fun stuff. So I know a bit about alpha amylase, and you were kind of describing its bioavailability within like oceans and everything. It is a common enzyme inside of humans, but I think you're talking about like a heat non-sensitive heat version of it. And it's the main process of how it kind of like unlocks the corn. I thought was really cool. It just basically like breaks down a lot of the starches and sugars on the inside into more simple sugars, like you said, that are then able to be digested by the cow directly instead of having to go through a bacteria, which might take away some of the energy. So you
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you know more about it than I do. So I'm, not a scientist, but absolutely. So it's designed to, and it's actually in the corn, right? So, yeah, and it's more efficient. And the efficiency is, you think about the efficiency, you don't need as much feed. So I always think of, if you don't need 5 or 10% of your feed, that's land that could be put into margin, stream areas. That's land that could be used elsewhere. It's less water, the less greenhouse gases coming from the cattle. So all kinds of really cool environmental benefits.
No, so I was going to have somewhat of a follow-up question to that. It's a little noisy around me, so I apologize about the background noise. But I know that so the Inogen feed that you provide cattle is still grain-based, whereas the majority of cattle are still designed to graze on grasses and like grasslands, obviously. So does the introduction of grain into the feed have a significant impact, or is the reduction of those like starches actually helping bring down the methane output? So like grass-fed cattle, I believe, emit less methane than grain-fed cattle. But
so we could get into a whole thing on beef supply chain.
fair enough.
So grass-fed beef take longer to finish, essentially. So they're out in the field, they're out there longer. And so their greenhouse gas emissions are actually higher.
Okay.
There's about 30% of corn in the United States is grown specifically for feed. So that's a huge footprint. So Inogen has a real big potential in the United States in particular.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to turn to folks in the room for a question, and then if those of you online would also put your questions into the chat, we'll alternate back and forth, and I'll be looking to Sean to help me pull those. But who's got a question here in the room? Don't make Gary ask the question. All right.
I was wondering, Syngenta makes a lot of products that help supply chains become more climate friendly and sustainable, but is the company itself doing any work to be more sustainable in its processes during its research and testing and that kind of thing?
Absolutely. So we have facilities and operations all over the world. And so we're doing a similar exercise where you're looking at the facilities and, water efficiency, changing light bulbs. We actually generate quite a bit of electricity on our own sites. So using solar and then putting, pollinator habitat under the solar, looking at places where we'll do geothermal instead. So we're going through that process again. We've done that before, but it was before my time. And then we grow a lot of seeds. So we actually contract directly with our seeds growers. So we're looking at putting together kind of guidance for them on how they can grow more sustainable seed production for us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question before we go to the one online. What does an average day look like for you?
Well, Syngenta is based in Switzerland, so my days usually start about 5 in the morning. which are totally fine with me because I get done early. But we have a North America sustainability team. We also have a global sustainability team. So we generally have some global meetings. And they're actually working on revising the strategies around soil health and biodiversity right now. So we have some kind of working meetings around that. I do a lot of, my job is programs and partnerships. So I do a lot of interacting with nonprofits. So developing projects, calling people and figuring out when we can get out in the field and look at certain projects, strategy development. So getting a group of non-Syngenta people sort of in the room virtually to figure out what are the issues here, what do we want to address, and how are we going to build this program, who's going to pay for it. So a lot of meetings, but I do amazingly get to be out in the field a little bit, which is nice.
That's great. Question in the room, and then we'll come to you.
Yes, I'm curious, do you think that Syngenta perpetuates the practice of monocropping?
I think, we're a seeds business and we sell mostly corn and soy seeds, right? And most of our products are around corn, soy, potatoes. But we also, I think it's the business. So I guess the answer would be yes. If we didn't, we'd be out of business. We do a lot though around diversifying the seeds that we're selling, programs that help farmers improve rotations, cover cropping. So, scenarios and prescriptions for cover cropping and how to get more diversity into the rotation. So, that's, I think when you find a big business, if we didn't do corn and soy, we would be not doing very well.
Did you follow?
Yes,
Go for it.
I did. I don't know.
You can ask it. I won't get offended. Believe me, I've been through this all with my dad many times. He's
because it's the first thing that comes to my mind, at least. I'm more curious about your personal philosophy or your perspective working to increase sustainability in a business that is in an inherently unsustainable field.
What better place to do it? I think that if you can make sustainability work in big agriculture is not going to go away from my perspective. If it did, we would have really serious food supply issues, food security issues all around the world. It would be really detrimental to communities everywhere. So it's not going to go away anytime soon. So my perspective is I have maybe 25, 30 years left in my career. So if I can make headway in a big company like Syngenta, then I'm going to be doing a lot for the world.
You don't think regenerative or restorative agriculture could feed the amount of people that's projected to be on the planet in the next 10, 20 years?
Not anytime soon.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a transition, and there's been quite a bit of research looking at if you were to transition all of the monoculture into organic, regenerative, and I think some of the systems that we work with actually are regenerative. I think it's farm by farm. Some of them are really top notch, doing all kinds of really cool stuff, and some of them have a lot of room to improve. So I think even in a big monoculture, you can still have a regenerative system. But there's a lot of research that shows you couldn't feed as many people, and you'd have pretty devastating impacts if you were to take away the corn and soy and the potatoes that are grown around the world. Transition over the next 40 or 50 years, yes, absolutely. More diversity, for sure. That's my number one. Edge of field stuff, taking out marginal land. That is actually way more cost effective and way more beneficial for farmers than them to be farming stuff that's not productive. So yeah, absolutely.
Other questions?
So I did have another question.
Got one more. Let's get around for everybody to get a first one in. We'll come back to you, Shane. Thank you.
All right, so related to the big agriculture stuff, I read an article this month that was about these children's books that are being made by Feeding Minds Press, which is a project of the American Farm Bureau Foundation. And they are promoting pesticides and nitrogen fertilizers to like kindergartners and early elementary school children. And so I was just curious what your thoughts are now working for a company like Syngenta about the agriculture industry, like actively promoting stuff like this.
I haven't seen that, and I haven't heard anything like that. I will say Syngenta is pretty, I mean, I think all of the big ag companies that I am aware of, Bayer, Monsanto, BASF, Syngenta, and Corteva are like the four major global ones, are all really cognizant of using pesticides when they're necessary in the right place at the right time for the right insect. I have never seen anyone kind of promoting using them when they're not absolutely necessary. And the other thing that comes up too a lot is, you know, the pesticides are regulated. This is, I don't know how to, I've only been at Syngenta for 9 months. I'm still, you know, getting my feet wet. Sometimes when you take something off the market, something worse comes on, right? And so just having a line of sight of what's the best tool for the farmer that they can use that's the least impact to anything except what they're trying to get rid of. That's the perspective that I see a lot of people at Syngenta taking.
My question is sort of like, I guess, outside of innovation and like improving yield and efficiencies, what else can be done to sort of improve the sustainability of agriculture?
Oh my gosh, so much, I think. Looking at what crops are grown in what places. So if you look globally, there are some crops and some systems that are just in not the right quote unquote places, whether it's because of water issues, whether it's because of biodiversity opportunities, whether it's, you know, major climate, like, you know, coastal areas or flooding areas. I think some of the cool things that we can do is look at how climate is going to change in the next 10, 20 years and start to forecast where certain crops should move, where certain crops could be grown, diversifying the crop system. So bringing in some of the older seeds, trying new stuff, you know, changing up our diets so that we have more diversity in our diets. Gosh, there's a million things, cover crops and interseeding. I was in Texas recently and the watermelon growers there bring bees in from all over and they pay a lot of money for these honeybees. And the watermelons are grown in a row. There's like a plastic and then they put the little watermelon seeds in, and in between the rows, they have windrows. So just to keep the wind from the seedlings, and the windrows are barley. And I asked them, I was like, could we put like 2 different kinds of flowers in there with the barley and just have it be like a pollinator habitat? And the farmer was like, wow, I mean, I don't see why not. Yeah, that'd be awesome. We should do that because then they can get some native pollinators in there. They don't have to ship the bees in. So I think anywhere you go in the world, there's all kinds of really cool opportunities for making farming more sustainable.
We got one on the chat, and then we're going to you, Brendan.
All right. I had a question for you from Shane. Has Syngenta's actions, do you believe that Syngenta's actions around sustainability have encouraged other big agricultural companies to follow suit? How does competition in this space, how does that interact around sustainability?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I honestly think competition is the best motivator, right? It works really well for farmers. It works really well for ranchers. It works for nonprofits. And in particular, it works for businesses, I think. I personally think Syngenta is doing the coolest stuff, of course, but yeah, all of the companies, if you look at them, have set ambitious goals. I think the difference is how they're rolling it through their business and how it's touching down on the ground. So there's there's varying success around the world with the big ag companies. What I would really like to see is the big ag companies to come together and make some sort of deforestation, not, zero deforestation commitment or something like that. Those like pre-competitive collaborative things around companies has not been as prominent as I would have hoped, but maybe it will be someday. So yeah, lots of competition. It's good for us. And we're constantly looking at what all the other companies are doing. Yeah.
And over to you.
So I did have the question because it sounded like Ben was directing the question back to me now. So I did have a question in regards to the crop rotation thing. So in modern day America, the most prominent crop rotation is a crop rotation, basically, where you go from like corn into soybeans in order to re-nitrify the soil. I know that originally the crop rotation wasn't crop rotation, is what local indigenous people would do is they would actually do a mixed crop where you'd have like a squash, a bean, or a legume, and then another like superfood like corn or something. I know that reduces the overall like profit that a farmer gets by having like mixed crops. But do you think that would be another advantageous way to try and increase sustainability, or do you think maintaining our monoculture would be a better future?
Absolutely. No, I think you're right on. And actually, we just donated a bunch of seed to a program called the MILPA program, which is exactly that. It's called the 1 Acre Program. It's in Nebraska and it's through the Nature Conservancy's leading it. But it's essentially that the squash seeds and the pumpkin seeds and all that will be put into a mix. The farmers get an acre at a time and they'll put it in their buffers. The idea is that they can actually grow vegetables to give to the community. I think it's to be determined whether they'll get great yields. But that's the idea, is that MILPA, that Native American kind of idea that you can grow multiple crops together at the same time. So yeah, you should look it up. There was a press release out about it, I think 2 weeks ago. It's called the 1 Acre Program. And the idea is that it scales, right? We're starting at 1 acre. It'll grow hopefully over time. But yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense. That would be a process of trying to like you said, start with 1 acre and then over time it just colonizes more as it spreads out. Or
that we have more seed to give them so they can do more acres. We're starting small so that they can try it out. And a lot of the growers, I think, are just setting aside sort of corners of their field that have irrigation, and if they need it or whatever, I don't know all the systems, but starting really cool. Small, making sure it works for farmers and then expanding. Yeah, it is a super cool program.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more question in the room, and then our time is up. Who'd like to go? Go for it.
Yeah, so I'm curious, with big ag, inflicting specific agricultural practices and technologies on local communities internationally can be seen as imperialistic when you rule out traditional practices for profit, especially like local farmers might become dependent on these big ag monopolies because otherwise they don't have competitive advantage against other farmers, which can be a problem for a lot of local farmers. They just get put out of business and fall into poverty. So what has Syngenta been doing kind of like surrounding the issue of food sovereignty, food justice, and how have local communities reacted to you guys going into their community?
We haven't, I wouldn't say that Syngenta has gone into a community. Like, as I mentioned, we work a lot through partners. And so when we're doing projects in India and Africa, that's generally through a nonprofit that already works there. So I think it's a lot lighter touch. I don't think you'd see a group of Syngenta folks going in and sort of, selling a program or a technology directly to growers. Is that what you mean? I'm not sure I'm answering your question very well.
Yeah, I guess also just like your responsibility with those suppliers, like with your partners, like, do you have any connection to them over what they're doing with that kind of thing? Because I feel like it's kind of like a joint responsibility.
Well, we do in that the partnerships generally are kind of co-created, right? And that we wouldn't sort of do it ourselves or let them just do whatever they want. And I'm not sure I'm answering your question very well, but generally when we go into like a community where we're trying out a new program, there are multiple partners. We also have the Syngenta Foundation, which focuses very much on smallholder growers around the world. And those are very grassroots programs where they go in and figure out what the community needs and build programs around that, as opposed to Syngenta coming and, you know, selling the Inogen corn in Africa where they don't have feedlots, you know, those kinds of things. So we're trying to be, I think in the last couple of years, and Ben, hopefully you're talking about this, I feel like companies have gotten more cognizant, more aware of figuring out what the community needs are and not just going in and taking what works in Iowa to South Africa and thinking it's going to be a good fit. So I think I've seen some evolution, and even at the Nature Conservancy, I've seen them change their model where they go depending on what's needed in the community. It's a nice change.
Well, Dayna, thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if you have any last words of wisdom. I might follow up with you to see if we can't get some of those slides, right?
Yeah.
Your stages. It might be helpful. They're going to be, for a final project, they're all going to be looking at companies, so they might want to use that 3 stages frame that you shared. But thank you so much. I know it's probably dinner time in your household, and we really appreciate you joining us.
No, it was a lot of fun. You guys made me sweat. I didn't think I was going to get the big ag. But I should have been ready for it, but you know, it is what it is.
Thanks so much, Dayna. Have a good day.
It was great. Thank